Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, April 5th, 2018, and I guess it's time for another show. This is my guess, my best guess, and educated guess at that. Of course, I've been told it's time for another show, and I have agreed to provide one. Greg Dworkin will be with us in assistance in that effort. Shortly, we'll get to the actual news this morning. What's going on? I don't know. Twitter-wise, I noticed that, this story, I don't know, this is not an important story, I don't think. I mean, it might be revealing, but there are many more revealing ones. But this one stuck with me for some reason. Maybe because there was a picture with it, because The Hill tweeted it. We should all be doing what The Hill does. Trump quietly hosting private White House dinner parties, according to a report. I don't know that there's anything wrong with that. I just note for the record, I have never seen so much official eating being planned for a president before. It struck me the other day that the president was sitting down to another working lunch, which I guess on the whole, I feel bad about bringing this up a little bit. Like, okay, if you're going to be occupying the White House more or less 24/7, or certainly the president's office, he appears to be dead set on occupying the president's office, no matter what we say about it. Perhaps we can get to more persuasive about it after the elections. But if you're going to be there the whole time, you might as well make every minute a working minute. Now, I don't think that's what he's doing, but the case for the working lunch, the working dinner, not a bad one for a hardworking president. I mean, I don't think that's what he's doing. And I think he's trying to have other people around when he eats his meals, because that, I guess, looks like it's the hallmark of a busy executive, I guess. In his mind, you know, he's constantly putting on the show of being the busy New York real estate executive, even if he's president. And I think working meals for those guys is a big deal, largely because, well, I don't know, meals are probably, for a real workaholic, an inconvenience. And so you try to shoehorn some additional work in there. And I think that carries over. Even if everyone knows that you're really a do-nothing slob, I guess if you have working lunches and working breakfasts and working dinners, it's enough of an appearance. And all those other hardworking people who are hard to meet with will meet with you for a meal because they have to eat to live. And I was going to say I don't begrudge him that, but I wouldn't mind if he stopped eating and didn't live, I guess. I hate to wish that on him, but I wish it on him. I'm lying about hating to wishing on him. I have a great time doing that. Anyway, that's not what this is about. I noticed that he's been having meetings, in particular in the cabinet room, which I don't think I've really ever seen used so frequently as a dining room before. It really wasn't a place to eat. But I took a look around just to see if there were historical pictures on the record. Like, okay, did Obama ever have people over for lunch or dinner, for that matter, and eat in the cabinet room? And the best I could find, I did see one time at which they were eating something. They had set the table for some food, but not the big, with the china and the silverware and everything. And I've seen coffee service at meetings held in the cabinet room. And I haven't done an exhaustive search, but I've never seen what I've seen in the past couple weeks that I've noticed this in the Trump administration. That daily lunch is set out on china and silverware and the whole bit. And the place is set for a meal, and it's an awkward place really to eat. But I think he thinks he loves having his meetings there because it's boardroom style. I also notice how frequently he hosts foreign dignitaries at the cabinet room table, whereas ordinarily, previously, presidents have set it in open chairs in front of an open space, like the fireplace. And I don't know, there's the Oval Office space for that. Lots of meetings in, I don't know, what do they call it? The Treaty Room, I think. But very different settings for foreign dignitaries to sit and meet. But he loves doing it and staffing it and having people to his side. And it looks like The Apprentice. which was itself a made-up set. And we did read something about that at one point, that the actual boardroom of the Trump organization was too frumpy. I'm not trying to make that rhyme with Trumpy, but just too frumpy and I don't know, lame-looking for television. They had to design a fake set for the boardroom in The Apprentice. That's not really where he did his business. And, well, that's not what I mean either. I'm not talking about the PB tape. And he wasn't involved in that anyway. But it was all a show. And now he just enjoys the staging of things in the cabinet room and putting things there. But it's turned into a dining room. I see more meals that he's sitting with. I see more stories about people he invites over for dinner. He's not a breakfast guy. That I'm sure he eats plenty. He just doesn't invite people over for it. But once again, now a series of private dinner parties, which I don't know if that's out of keeping with the presidency, and you want to consult with as many people as possible. But of course, this White House doesn't have any visitors logs, so I don't know if you're ever going to find out who ate with him and what they talked about, unless it's someone like Joe Scarborough, who will blab to the press about it later on. So we'll see what's coming. I think this comes out in light of the news that he ate dinner with, or he ate the dinners of, I don't know, Peter Thiel and the CEO of Oracle, Safra Katz, who came over to help bash Amazon, apparently, and that made it into the papers. And now we got a story of how often is he doing this stuff, and is this just his Lincoln bedroom or what? So just another front to open up in the Donald Trump is a weird guy and maybe robbing us blind file, and it's a thick file at this point. Craig Dworkin is here with probably another couple additions to that file, and maybe something else like happening on the policy front too. Who knows? Let's check in. Hi, good morning, Greg.
Hey, who knows? So I'm late coming into the show today.
That's okay. I'm late having a show.
Well, I didn't hear anything about what you said, so I have no idea what you're talking about.
I also. So we were in the same boat.
We're in the same boat. So I'm going to finish up something we started talking about yesterday, and that was something that's probably only amusing to me and partly you and nobody else. But we were talking about musicals on Broadway that happen to have political implications. And I have the lyrics here from a song we didn't do yesterday called Politics and Poker, which is from Fiorello. I mentioned to you it's one of my favorite politics musicals.
Yeah,
and
like
the refrain goes something like this: politics and poker, shuffle up the cards and find the joker. Neither game's for children, either game is rough. Decisions like who to pick, how to play, what to bet, when to call a bluff. And then they go on to say, if politics seems more predictable, that's because usually you can stack the deck. And they finally finish with, brother, you got to have that slippery, haphazardous commodity. You've got to have the cards. And so, what happens here is when you have the cards, you play them. And when you don't have the cards, you bluff. Well, that's what's happening with Trump in China. He doesn't really have the cards, but he's bluffing, and they know it. But what happens is you wind up getting stuck in doing things that you may otherwise not wish to do, but you really have no choice about. And that's kind of where we find ourselves today. Now, Wall Street is taking the position that, well, maybe it doesn't matter. LOL, nothing matters. They're not really going to do it. We don't really believe Trump is going to do anything. The trouble is Trump doesn't really know what he's doing. And so that may turn out to be a bad bet.
Yeah, maybe. But what's Wall Street without a few bad bets?
Yeah, Ryan Cooper has a nice piece here, which I'll add at the bottom of the stuff that I sent you, called Trump's Predictably Ruinous Strategy in the Trade War.
At least it's predictable.
Yeah. And he says, the problem is Wednesday's opening bell after the market plummeted eventually recovered on the assumption that the White House would pull back, but Ryan Cooper writing, I wouldn't be so sure that it will. There's no clear negotiating strategy from Trump. Indeed, no sign he even knows what he wants, let alone how to achieve it. There's a serious risk of a trade war that'll escalate indefinitely. And, goes on to point out, intelligent people often struggle, and he's talking about how the Chinese can figure out what Trump is doing and therefore negotiate with him. Intelligent people, meaning China, often struggle to understand incredibly stupid or ignorant ones. Oh. President Trump is an oblate lump of resentment, prejudice, and sexual neurosis marinated for decades in the poison stew of cable news and reactionary media, logic has a tough time getting through. It's possible he'll grasp the Chinese strategy and figure it's not worth the fight, or more likely, simply get bored and give up. But he also might let his ego get tangled up in the dispute and keep lashing out with more and more tariffs. Only time will tell which road we're going to be stuck on.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. It's not informative in the sense that it tells us what's actually going to happen. It just tells us that we don't know. It's honest punditry for a change.
Yeah.
So that's good news.
So a couple of new polls out today. This one is from Morning Consult, and the headline is Trump's monthly approval rating hits record low in March.
I just heard
41% approve, 54% disapprove for a Trump-friendly Morning Consult poll that is actually pretty low. And what's interesting is the strongly disapprove is the highest it's ever been in that poll at 41%.
Okay.
And the somewhat disapprove is pretty steady at 13%. And so that means that it's interesting, the somewhat approve and somewhat disapprove have pretty much stayed steady. But the strongly approve and the strongly disapprove are the ones that there's movement.
Okay.
Right? The strongly approve dropped a few points and the strongly disapprove went up a few points. And, of course, the suggestion there is that's because he hit the Rust Belt and some of the farm country places with his tariffs, and they didn't like it.
Yeah, well, okay, that could be it. He was just bragging about his best polls ever.
Yeah, well, he's talking about Rasmussen, which nobody really thinks is an actual poll.
Oh.
How Trump's faring in Senate battlegrounds, net approval in March 2018, and how it's changed since February of 2018. And that's in this Morning Consult piece here, and it's rather interesting. Michigan, he has dropped 3 points. It's now negative 13 in Michigan. In Wisconsin, he's dropped 3 points. In Pennsylvania, he's dropped 3 points. In all three of those states, he's underwater.
Okay.
And in Ohio, he's dropped 5. In Arizona, he's dropped 4. In Montana, he's dropped 5. I don't know why they call that a battleground state, but they do.
I'm sure.
And of course, in West Virginia,
to
he's
have
up
a battle there would be fine.
So he's got a solid hold on West Virginia.
Okay. Maybe the teachers can change that.
Right. And the teachers might. There's some gun stuff happening in Florida that might change Florida, too. He's minus.
Sure.
He's dropped 2 points in Florida as well, by the way. And the civics poll, which is run by Drew Linzer, associated with Daily Kos, basically also has 53% disapprove, 43% approve, but that's not really moving. So what I'm saying is that despite the fact that Donald Trump tweeted this morning that, look at Rasmussen, I'm 51%, it's the highest ever, I'm great, not really seeing that in other polls. Just thought I'd mention that.
Okay. Well, yeah, no surprise there. I guess that he latches onto these things. Was he tweeting about it again this morning, or just
he was?
Okay, he just
As a
won't
matter
let
of
that
fact.
go. I have not checked it.
I know that because John Brennan
Yeah.
was tweeting back about it, what Trump said, and it didn't have those, up and down, uppercase, lowercase stuff.
Oh, too bad.
Right? But he wrote, still rising, Donald Trump did. Still rising, Rasmussen poll shows Donald Trump approval ratings now at 51%. And he cites Breitbart.
Okay, so that's the still rising. Is the other day it was 50.
Right.
And now it's
And John Brennan writes, I served 6 presidents, 3 R's and 3 D's. I directly supported Clinton, Bush, 43, and Obama. While I didn't agree with all their policy choices, I admired and respected all of them as they put country above their personal interests. Not so with you, as your self-adoration is disgraceful.
Yeah, well, he's kind of a weirdo.
I got a long list of Scottish insults, too. There's a nice collection I've been having. Maybe that'll come in handy. I'll send that to you separately just because it's fun to read on the air. And it's even funner to listen to the video of the Scots doing it.
Okay. Is that right? Is a video?
Yeah. With the proper pronunciation of all the stuff that you can't really understand. And they actually do it 2 ways. They do it local colloquial dialect and then the more London way of doing it, still with a Scottish accent. It's very funny.
Oh.
And I'll find that for you and send it. In the meantime, there's some important stuff going on. And I'm just trying to find. I was reading this morning and going to see if I could locate it. A fascinating Tom Edsall piece from the New York Times about authoritarianism.
Okay. I demand that you show it to me.
Well,
Is that good?
one of the many things I found interesting about it
All right.
is that he quotes Mark Hetherington and Jonathan Weiler, whose book on it I had done a book report for.
Book report.
For Daily Kos.
Yes, might as well call them that.
It's a book report. And so, and I interviewed John Weiler on it. And they're moving away from calling it authoritarianism simply because they don't want to associate that with fascism. They're trying to talk about something that's a little bit different altogether.
Okay, but that's a different word, so that should be enough.
It should be, but people just equate the two very, very quickly, even though they're not supposed to. So here it is. It's called The Contract with Authoritarianism. And let's see if I can select this and then copy it and then paste it, because people turn into radio so they can hear me say those things.
Right.
There it is.
I have received it. I'll tell them that. Okay.
And in 1994, Newt Gingrich, our favorite, the guy who broke everything.
Yes.
In 1994, Newt Gingrich, brandishing his contract with America, led a Republican revolution that swept aside Democratic majorities in the House and Senate, initiating an epic of conservative ascendancy that lingers on. Don Sipple, a Republican campaign consultant, 2 Ps, declared at the time that the 94 midterms pitted a Republican Party calling for discipline against a Democratic Party focused on therapy. Right? 2 years later, George Lakoff did the very famous conservatism is based on a strict father model, while liberalism is centered on a nurturant parent model, which was shorthanded down to the daddy party and the mommy party. You know that one. Yeah,
I do. And you're going to get in trouble with the feminists if we stick with that. So it's evolved since then.
It has evolved since then. That was back in the 90s. But what's fantastic is the number of women in the resistance, the number of women running as candidates, and the number of women in a recent story highlighting the fact that there are like 40% campaign managers who are women.
Oh.
So things really have evolved since then.
Yeah.
Anyway, the election of Donald Trump, built as it was on several long-term trends at Conversion 2016, has created an authoritarian moment. Somewhat surprising is the subject of remaking partisan politics through authoritarian sorting, a forthcoming book by the political scientists Christopher Federico, Stanley Feldman, and Christopher Weber, who argue that, quote, 3 trends, polarization, media change, and the rise of what many people see as threats to the traditional social order, have contributed to a growing divide within American politics. It's a divide between those who place heavy value on social order and cohesion relative to those who value personal autonomy and independence. And they're looking at the authoritarian scale and found that 62% of white voters who ranked highest supported H.W. Bush in 92, but 86% of the most authoritarian white voters backed Trump, increased to 24%.
That's interesting. Those descriptions are so interesting. I'm assuming that we're saying that it's the authoritarians who place heavy value on social order and cohesion, and versus personal autonomy and independence, which is so odd because I'm so old, I remember like yesterday when conservatism was all about let's try on the clothing of the libertarian party.
You're just confusing the libertarian moment with the authoritarian moment, and that's why I'm trying to clarify this for you.
Okay.
There is no libertarian moment, okay? So that's...
that's helpful, yeah. But yeah, it's so interesting to see that.
It's happening,
the conservatives would have grabbed it. Oh, the personal autonomy and independence, that's me. Now that's the other side. Oh, well, but social order and cohesion, that's the socialists, right? No, it's not.
So one fellow here
it might be,
notes a different Christopher Johnson, a Duke.
Yes.
Did open versus closed personality identity in the politics of redistribution, and writes, as these social and cultural conflicts have become a bigger part of our political debates, Citizens have sorted into different parties based on personality. Isn't it fun that we did those personality
Yeah,
tests the other
another
day?
one of these. So, okay.
With citizens high in openness, much more likely to be liberals and Democrats than those low in openness. This psychological sorting process does not line up perfectly with older partisan differences based on class, because these higher in income and education also tend to be higher in openness. But an important caveat is that individuals who take a stronger interest in politics and know more about it, in other words, the committed, the involved, the activists,
Yeah.
are more likely to be sorted on the basis of openness. So it's really among the most politically engaged Democrats and Republicans where we see members of different parties diverge. So in other words, activist Democrats are very different than activist Republicans, whereas your average Democratic voter and your average Republican voter have a lot more in common.
Oh.
But the activists are really quite different. Well, that's just another way of what I've always said. You know, the rally voters for Trump and let's say our peeps are quite different.
Yes.
Whereas if you're going to go out and persuade a Trump voter, don't do a rally voter. That's a waste of time.
Yeah.
Pick the guy who just, I don't know. I don't know anything about it. I just sort of like him.
Okay. So, yeah, I
You
guess.
know, well, let me tell you what he's about. Well, maybe I don't sort of like him anymore.
Oh. Well, that'll work to some extent. All right.
Now, in their book, they say, with the rise of cultural and lifestyle politics, Democrats and Republicans are now sharply distinguished by a set of psychological dispositions related to experiential openness, a dimension of personality tapping tolerance for threat and uncertainty in one's environment. And let me just remind you, we were talking the other day about the ocean score.
Yes.
Openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism, that sort of thing.
Right.
You know, so that's kind of, I think, what they're referencing here. And then Edsel goes on to say, in 2009, Mark Hetherington of Vanderbilt and Jonathan Weiler of the University of North Carolina wrote one of the fundamental texts on this topic, Authoritarianism and Polarization in American Politics. I thought it was a great book, and that's why I did a book report on it.
Okay.
In it, Hetherington and Weiler argue that preferences about many of the new issues on the American political agenda, such as gay rights, the war in Iraq, and proper response to terrorism and immigration, are likely structured by authoritarianism. They're colliding conceptions of right and wrong, depending upon what point of the scale you're on. And now, this October, they're going to do an elaboration of this. Price or pickup, how the event answers to four simple questions explain America's Great Divide.
Oh, no.
And they're going to abandon the use of the word authoritarian because of its negative connotations and its association with fascism.
Okay.
So they're going to look at opposite sides of the divide as having a fixed or a fluid worldview. Those with a fixed worldview see American carnage. Those with a fluid worldview see the world as a big, beautiful place that's safe to explore. The fixed tend to be wary of what they perceive as constant threats to their physical security and social change. And the fluid are much more open to change and see it as a strength. So diversity is a strength there. Okay, and they talk about the answers to questions about which childhood traits you'd like people to be. Do you want them to obey their elders? Do you want them to be good mannered? Or do you want them to be questioning? Do you want them to be curious? Those are different traits. And they say not only do the answers to these questions explain preference about race, immigration, sexual orientation, gender attitudes, the projection of military force, gun control, and just about every culture war issue, people's worldviews also undergird people's life choices. Because the fixed are wary about the dangers around them, they prefer the country over the city. The fluid prefer the cities.
It's interesting to consider in light of, I guess one, the continuing theme of projection at least among the deplorable side of the scale, and how this description of the two groups, and then thinking about how much time, in particular deplorables, spend accusing liberals of snowflakeism. I guess we could make up that word. And you're always trying to protect yourself from everything, and you got to have your safe spaces. And well, it seems like at least according to this argument, the better description of the conservatives and Trump supporting side of the ledger is about safe spaces and snowflakeism.
Yeah. But notice it's all about personalities, and here one of the books that he's citing, and he does a lot of different groups, different clusters of authors, different papers, and so on and so forth. But in this one, he's talking about the expressive dimension of policy choices. Quote, in this view, the influence of personality on economic opinion arises not because the expected outcomes of a policy match an individual's traits, but because those traits resonate with the social meaning of that a policy has acquired. You could see that easily because what's your view of how the economy is doing? Well, who's president? Mm-hmm. Well, what's that got to do with what your view is? Well, it's got everything to do with it. Because if Trump is president, and I like Trump, the economy's great. But if Obama's president and it goes up even higher, faster, it's awful.
Yeah, well, we've seen that.
Right. And they explain further, citizens care less about the outcomes of a policy.
Yes.
And the outcomes a policy produces, and more about the groups and symbols with which a policy is associated.
That seems true.
That's why Hillary Clinton running on policy was a loser.
I guess
people don't care about policy. They care about broader things. And we always made fun of George Bush is somebody that you'd rather have a beer with than John Kerry.
Even though he wouldn't drink beer.
Well, but the point is that this whole symbol of whether or not he's with your tribe and whether or not he's with your group is far more important than Kerry's policies being a whole lot better.
Yes, that's true. And, of course, then we learned the anti-intellectual streak in these guys meant having a policy, whatever it was, didn't matter.
Well, that's because Trump doesn't have one. So if you're going to associate, in other words, the association comes first and the policy stuff comes second is what I'm trying to say.
All right. Well, I can believe that.
He's the extreme example, so you could see it in clear bas relief.
All right. Well, thanks for making it so clear, Donald Trump. We'll be back to talk more about it in a minute. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, that are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Greg Dworkin is still with me, and we had a little conversation in the background, and I was wildly speculating, and as it turns out, there's some actual scholarly opinion that's in agreement, so that means I get to repeat that point for the rest of you. I was very interested. I've been interested in this article and just how odd it is that roles seem to have reversed in many ways. And maybe they have, maybe they haven't. Maybe it's just an illusion that is perpetuated by this, at least the conservative type of this habit of projection. And I guess we have to assume that everybody involves themselves in some level of projection somewhere. I don't know. But that's because I'm so open, right? I'm open to that possibility, even though I'm sure it's just them. But all of these, this weird phenomenon of the of conservatives accusing others of being snowflakes and of needing safe spaces and of banning everything that seems threatening to them, and liberals want to protect everybody and wrap them up in bubble wrap and never have anything happen. And that's been and it's still their argument on guns, by the way. So it's really interesting to
not just guns.
To watch.
No puppet. You're right. The puppet.
Well, that too, yeah. I mean, projection in general has been, it's about everything. But I mean, in particular on the gun issue, their accusation continues to be, you guys don't, you liberals are very unaccepting of risk, and you want to protect yourself from every eventuality. And it doesn't make any sense in the gun context anyway, because the real risk is with the gun. But okay. At any rate,
another favorite there is You libs never really care about facts. We try to tell you
No.
about facts, and you don't even know anything about guns. You don't want to learn facts.
That's
And we
true.
say, actually, we love facts. Why don't you let the CDC study this? And they go,
Yeah,
no.
right, run away. Exactly. So, well, that's true. The gun thing is a separate issue in that it's just a great microcosm of the whole problem, really. But it's so intense, and the tribalism there is even worse. But what I found interesting was this sort of reversal of roles on this protecting yourself and cocooning yourself away from the world, and that Republicans and conservatives still feel so sure of themselves in accusing liberals of being the ones to do that. And of course, we spoke of that in terms of projection. And I wondered whether maybe this was just sort of a defense mechanism for them when they recognize, or whether unconsciously or whatever, they recognize traits they dislike about themselves, this protectionism, etc., this worrying about everything is going to attack them in the world and that they're helpless before it. That's unacceptable to them. So the way they have of dealing with it is to say, it's not me, it's you. Liberals have this problem, and I know liberals have this problem, and I don't, because if I did have this problem and accused liberals of having it, that would be hypocrisy. And I definitely know one thing about myself: I'm not a hypocrite. So it must be the case that you are the snowflakes and not us. And I just sort of theorized that off the top of my head, although it made a certain amount of sense, and I wondered whether psychiatrists would agree. And you've sent me this clip here. Where is this from? Is this?
It's just Googling it.
Quick definition
it just
of
popped
projection.
out as one of those little boxes with
Okay.
with a link to it. But
projection is a psychological defense mechanism. I guess we hit the nail on the head with that one, in which individuals attribute characteristics they find unacceptable in themselves to another person. In some cases, projection can result in false accusations. Obviously, that seems pretty plain. But I guess probably people who are familiar with the psychological definition, the psychiatric or psychological definition, I guess, knew this already. But I've talked about projection just in terms of mirroring your faults in other people, but I never really thought about it as specifically projecting things that they found in themselves that was unacceptable, as opposed to, I do it, so everybody must do it, so I therefore project it on
for example, Chris Kobach and somebody who wants to game the voting system might accuse everybody else in the world of voter fraud.
Yeah. And that's another one. That's precisely the one we discussed the other day, that I thought that they maybe were just saying, well, I do this, so probably everyone does. And that's how I thought of projection, but this is makes it much clearer.
It's a little bit more...
I was wrong about what that meant, and this is, I assume, right, because it's on the internet, all written.
Well,
so.
Abraham Lincoln says if it's on the internet, it must be true.
Right.
So Linnea Mason, who is a University of Maryland political scientist, writes... 2015 paper called I Disrespectfully Agree, the differential effects of partisan sorting on behavioral and issue polarization. And her argument is a direct challenge to those who take, as she puts it, an instrumental view of politics. People choose a party and decide how strongly to support it based solely on each party's stated positions and whether the party shares interests with them, which is a rather quaint description. But instead, she writes, contrary to an issue-focused view of political decision-making and behavior, the results presented here suggest that political thought, behavior, and emotion are powerfully driven by political identities. The strength of a person's identification with his or her party affects how biased, active, and angry that person is, even if that person's issue positions are moderate.
Okay.
So you can have a perfectly normal across the table at a coffee shop discussion with somebody about policy, but then if you bring Trump into it, then you start getting into an argument.
That I can envision that happening very easily.
Right.
Because I've gone to a coffee shop.
Right. So there's other ways of looking at it. Other people use the domineering scale. Those who wish for a strong leader to force others to submit, and the premise there is evil's afoot. And so you have to have somebody strong to see that evil crushed. And there we have our evangelical base there. The domineering leader scale is based on responses to two statements. Our country would be great if we honor the ways our forefathers, do what the authorities tell us to do, and get rid of the rotten apples. Or what our country really needs is a strong, determined leader who will crush evil and take us back to our true path.
Holy moly. All right.
That's what I'm saying. The evangelicals, totally explained by that.
Man.
Okay. And what else can we have here? The rising salience of these debates has contributed to a growing authoritarian divide within the U.S., at least among white Americans. Trump is purposefully, writes Edsall, everybody else I was quoting were the political scientists, and Edsall says, Trump has purposefully exacerbated the many especially acrimonious political debates now dominating public discourse, deepening not only the authoritarian divide, but the divide between open and closed-mindedness, between acceptance and racial resentment, and between toleration and the aversion to change. He evidently believes that this is the best political strategy for presiding in the White House and winning re-election, but it's an extraordinarily destructive strategy for governing and for safeguarding America's interests in the world. Finish the article with that. And all you have to do is look at his tweets about the border, about caravans of people coming. Why is he doing this after all of his border stuff has been rejected, both by the American people, the courts, Congress, everybody? Why is he doing it? Because he's trying to gin up his base for the election.
I guess so.
That's why there's caravans of people who are coming to invade us, and he's got to send the National Guard down there.
Yes. Well, things are going crazy on that front. I'm still...
But that's what he's doing. I mean, it's all right here in terms of what the strategy is.
I would... I
And
find
in
this
other words, you can't attribute Trump the insight into knowing that this is what he's doing.
There we
This
go.
is Stephen Miller telling him what to write,
Yes.
and there's a reason Stephen Miller is doing that.
Yeah. And Stephen Miller is doing a great job staying out of the news, by the way.
Yes, but he's
that's the
still
way to
there,
stay-
and
well,
he's
that's the way to stay
fueling
there.
this crap that Trump is tweeting. Let's
Yes.
not lose, there's still white supremacists and Nazis in the White House, folks.
Yes, there is, and Stephen Miller, I think, has figured out the magic formula. Although Kellyanne Conway has done a pretty good job of staying. The way to survive there is spew all your crap, but never do it on the record. And really, honestly, except for certainly for Stephen Miller, don't speak to reporters ever on the record, but don't speak to them at all. Feed your lines to Trump, and he'll speak them, and you'll get what you want if you stay out of the headlines. Don't take his headlines. That's the way to get yourself killed in this administration, and they've done a great job staying under the radar. And Kellyanne Conway, whose job used to be being on the radar, has done a tremendous job for herself, collecting a paycheck by being silent.
Anyway, I had some other stuff here, but none of it is as interesting as that. So I may wind up, stopping.
All right.
Leave all the other stuff to you.
Oh, well, okay. I'll take a look at what else is in here, and maybe we can deal with it.
Yeah,
Wait,
I'll
a
give you
picture
one.
of John Brennan
This is a tweet from Jennifer Jacobs.
Okay.
Jennifer Jacobs is a White House reporter for Bloomberg. Conservative activists and industry allies are mounting an aggressive campaign to keep Scott Pruitt at the helm of the EPA, despite storm of ethics allegations.
Wow.
And I tweeted that with the comment, conservative activists and industry allies are horrible people. Part XLVII.
That's seemingly true. All right, let's see. You tweeted that? I'll have to find that. Or maybe you can send me that tweet, and I'll trace it back and provide that for everybody. He definitely, if he's going to stay, he needs a major campaign to do it. He's making all the mistakes that Miller and Conway have stopped making of late, and he's in the headlines, and that's a huge problem so far, pretty much for everybody. Ben Carson has gotten himself out of the headlines lately. That's smart for him.
Right.
Scott Pruitt, defending that is going to be difficult. They're definitely laying the groundwork for the firing if Trump wants to get around to it. But I guess it's still possible that they may save his job. And apparently a lot of people have a lot invested in him, or they wouldn't be doing this. So that tells you, some money has flowed somewhere, and you can find it probably with a minimum of digging. They're not very good at hiding it. And then take a look at the people who are defending his tenure and start with them. And that'll be a good couple months worth of dirty politics stories for the reporters, I think.
Right. I will add one thing here, which I thought was worth highlighting before I go. It's rather also an interesting piece, not quite as detailed as the Edsall piece. But this one is by Elizabeth Brunig in the Washington Post, and it's called Laura Ingram's Advertisers Aren't Really Staging a Boycott. It's a capital strike in parallel to labor strikes. And what she does is actually tie in what's happening with West Virginia and Oklahoma and the teachers with what the advertisers are doing.
Oh,
Right?
okay.
It's not quite right to classify these advertisers' decisions as a straightforward boycott. In the context of Ingram's long career in right-wing media, sniping at a teenager over college admissions is perhaps one of her less obscene stunts, which suggests it's unlikely that these companies suddenly grew a collective conscience and decided to bring their expenditures into accord with their morals. It's more likely that Ingram is the victim of a capital strike when investors withdraw or withhold investments en masse because they've determined that potential hazards outweigh the potential gains. Which means that it may be more permanent than just they're just reacting to the news. Remember, she says, capital is capital. It's not your friend. Conservatives are learning this the hard way, and those on the left shouldn't forget it either, even when companies happen to decide the best bet is the morally correct one. As Ross Douthat pointed out recently in the New York Times, corporate activism on social issues isn't in tension with corporate self-interest on tax policy and corporate stinginess in paychecks. The activism increasingly exists to protect the self-interest and the stinginess. In other words, to justify the ways of the CEOs, the cultural power brokers. So everybody will leave them alone. But the fact, Elizabeth Brunig writes, that we can't rely on capital to do much besides look out for its own cupidinous interests.
Wow.
That's a nice word, right?
Yeah.
Presents more than comeuppance for conservatives. It also foregrounds a key imbalance in politics. Capital can strike on a whim. Labor's ability to similarly assert itself in the public sphere is comparatively limited.
Oh.
No regulations or laws preventing or restricting capital strikes, but labor strikes, that's a different story.
Yes.
And some workers, she says, smart, courageous ones. I thought it was a nice, intelligent article here. Some workers, smart, courageous ones, have overcome this imbalance to a degree by virtually ignoring anti-strike laws, such as West Virginia teachers whose successful wildcat strike has already inspired a string of hopeful labor actions in other red states. To narrow the gap further will require either better laws or more strategic lawlessness, at least where advancing the interests of labor is concerned. And that might rankle capital, and it should. But remember, capital is not your friend. Just ask Laura Ingram.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it pays from time to time to remind ourselves just how constrained labor organizing was even before this latest rash of, like, say, Koch brothers fueled anti-union activism and legislating. But it's always been pretty constrained, and there was a grand bargain at one point struck in the 40s and 50s that limited the ability of labor to exercise its power because it had, believe it or not, for those of us not old enough to have lived through that, it was considered to have an outsized power. It's amazing to think of now. But, that's been whittled down and constrained legally in ways that capital really never has been.
Right. Now, our mutual friend, a labor guy, Jake McIntyre, called the West Virginia strikes and now the Oklahoma strikes the most important story in the country. And I think he's right. But it's not just the labor side of it in this particular article by Brunig that we were reading. It's also the whole idea of organizing boycotts to pursue a particular policy, right? And I think that the people who run the boycotts are pretty smart and they're pretty savvy, and they totally understand that trying to get a company to do the right thing isn't because you're going to get the company to see that it's the right thing to do. You're basically forcing the company to do it because they're going to lose money if they don't.
Yeah.
And that's fine. They're doing it with their eyes open is the point I'm trying to make. They're not trying to make everybody into social justice warriors.
Right. That's the complaint. Ironically, once again, a projected complaint from the other side.
So
Very
anyway, I'll leave it with that.
Okay.
And
now I don't know what to do. All right.
yeah, well, I don't know. Maybe Armando can come on and talk to us a little bit.
Oh, that'll probably happen.
Maybe. I don't know. But in any case, he is making the points that there are lots of well, John D. Rockefeller was probably the greatest example of this, but these days the Koch brothers, Armando's using as an example. Corporate largesse to deflect about how they're trying to screw the workers. In other words, they give a ton of money to the opera.
Yes.
And make a big deal out of it.
Museums and such.
Where do they get the money? They stole it from the workers.
Yes, that's true. They do that. And but they did learn the lesson early on that so-called polite society will forgive a lot of that if you fund the, activities and predilections of polite society, museums and the opera.
Yeah. And you're all polite about it.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll leave you all with that to talk about. Those two articles I thought were highlights for today. And, of course, the Fiorella play.
Yeah.
Which once again, I have to point out, I didn't sing for you, so you're in good shape. Take care, and I will talk to you on Monday, unless you're doing something else, because these days Mondays I got to ask you what's going on.
Yeah, I got to find out what's going on. This is a teacher work day, unless our teachers go on strike. No indication that that's going to happen, but who knows? Maybe they won't come back on Tuesday.
Who knows? I'll talk to you then.
We'll be here. All right. Thanks very much, Greg. Plenty to think about, and now what to do? Should we make it a philosophical show today? These are two very good articles that you could spend an awful lot of time on. Of course, we already have spent an awful lot of time on them. Technically speaking, it's just that Greg's been doing most of the spending of that time, and I just get to sit there and listen and observe, and that's great. But yeah, I don't know how much more we can squeeze out of these things. These are two I would encourage you to sit down and comb over these articles, because there are paragraphs in them that are important that we didn't discuss, but that we we have in the past, certainly the concepts. In particular, this Elizabeth Brunig piece here in the Washington Post really struck me as Greg was reading it, as it is very important. And I see what Jake was getting at and saying it's the most important story in the country. And that's not to say that it'll ever reach that the level of importance at which the general population will name it off the top of their heads as the most important story. Clearly, that's Stormy Daniels, but it's an enormous story that it'll continue to be underplayed for a number of reasons, and not the least of which is not everyone is super comfortable actually exploring the implications of it. It reminds me, this article does anyway, of some discussions that we've had in the past about just sort of offhandedly pausing for a moment in our discussion of labor, capitalism in general, and saying, worth reminding ourselves what capitalism is, not in the sense that we very often hear about it from people who are very involved formally in the discussions of whatever benefits there may even be, or the lack of benefits entirely, if you're talking to the socialists, some socialists, I don't know, about the evils of capitalism. But we've spoken in the past about what makes, what's the basic tenet, really, without trying to weight things ideologically in favor of one side or another. Capitalism, I guess, being that system that recognizes that if you still acknowledge the formula of capital plus labor, equaling whatever industrial output, any kind of output, any productivity, and we've complained from time to time. We seem to be putting such a huge emphasis on the capital. Well, obviously that's what you would be doing in capitalism. It's not laborism. It's capitalism we live under. And why capital versus labor? Why value one more than the other if they're both important, or maybe originally considered equally important add-ins in the formula for production? And I figured that the answer was why choose one or the other if you're approaching it from a non-ideological perspective. If you're just looking for the most efficient way to decide which one, if any, should be favored in the equation, it's easy to land on capital, and therefore in capitalism, when you argue, well, it's so much more mobile than labor is, and so much more versatile than labor is, and moving capital around, moving it from place to place is a simple thing. You don't have to uproot anyone. Families don't have to move. There are no encumbrances beyond regulatory ones, which are easily removed, from moving capital around. And capital tends to get things done pretty quickly, like promising somebody that I will provide labor for you. Well, one, there's only limited applications to that, and there's only so many things you can do with labor, whereas capital can be adapted to pretty much any purpose you need. Though it can't buy you love, that is true. And we have, at least according to song, although some people will accept some substitutions when it comes to love, some of which can be purchased with capital. And you know, who am I to tell them how they should be spending their time? Anyway, but I guess that's come up before, and it's a pretty major thing to discuss, and not everybody is totally comfortable with the idea of saying, well, you know, maybe we've placed too much emphasis on this, or maybe the system ought to be geared towards rebalancing the equation as between capital and labor. And although it's not entirely clear that there is an absolute, and nothing is ever going to find absolute agreement, but is there an argument to be made as to why they ought to be considered equal or near equal add-ins in this equation? Why wouldn't capital be the superior of the two? And not everybody is really ready to confront all of that. And not most people in America probably, just as with politics, most people are pretty much tuned out and have only the most vague or general idea about what they want or what's going on or any combination of the two. And it's only this narrow slice of activists who are even open to considering the possibility that there are deeper questions involved. But, yeah, most people are pretty well conditioned in this country, even if they have sympathies that would, upon examination, align more closely with socialists, still consider themselves pretty much capitalists because, you know, we spent an awful lot of time in this country convincing people that socialism itself, well, either was communism or was evil anyway, no matter how you sliced it, and it was a dirty word, and you couldn't fess up to being a socialist for a long time in this country, and it was I'm sure for them a lonely thing. I'm not certain I consider myself one, but that's mostly because I can't get to the conclusion about anything because I have to discuss it to death. But it's been a long time that we've been discussing this stuff, longer still for others who are dedicated activists in that area. But what an interesting area of inquiry. I mean, are more Americans open to the possibility that we've been doing it wrong for a long time? And it's not easy to tell, and it's a point of division even on the left, to be honest about it. I mean, not everyone on the political left is in the same place about this. There's a huge segment, and very much derided segment by socialist-leaning leftists inside the Democratic Party that still believes that hyper-capitalism can actually lead to left-favorable outcomes. That's increasingly, I think, the case for that collapsing. But, you know, you got between New Democrats and third-way types, but also libertarian-leaning. Remember when we said there was no libertarian moment? Libertarian-leaning, techno-capitalist left that's out there, or what they think of as left. But who knows what can be, who knows how to consider it, whether it's left or right or not. Back to the first article that we were talking about earlier and how difficult it is to classify everyone, considering that the roles of libertarian and authoritarian have reversed a couple of times and crossed the problem is we've crossed the streams a few times. And now it's no longer clear. Just a few years ago, it would have been the right claiming the mantle of personal freedom and individuality. It's weird. It's a little difficult to try and sort out. It's big thoughts that we're having, and we should try and scale them down a little bit. But Well, Greg sends me something that he says, here's something for hour 2, sending you an article on why you should care. Not that hour 2 is going to be about caring in general and why you should do it, but let's see. What's he got here? A long disruption is ahead. Disruption. You know, that's got to be happening because it's a buzzword and it's in Axios. But it's interesting. Illustrated with I assume, some sort of stock photo creation of a very large Lincoln copper penny being tugged at as between one human hand, or what appears to be a human hand, and one what appears to be robot pincher hand. And that was in my mind when I was talking about the libertarian, techno-left, futurist proponents of artificial intelligence, etc. Screw you, Facebook. This is how we got here. It's basically what we're trying to get around to that, and when we can bring it back to the political arena and Trump, Russia, and talk more about Cambridge Analytica. But interesting. So 2 pieces here now that it's piling up. Greg, a long disruption is ahead, and you know it's got to be true because that buzzword is there. With low-paying jobs, automation, robots stealing your medicine and your jobs if you're an old person. And what's this one? A scission. What's this? Automation to impact at least 50% of Canadian jobs in the next something. And probably in the next hour is when we'll get to that. Anyway, I'm not certain whether... I didn't realize this was a problem for Canadians, I guess. It's the problem world over, obviously. But not inapplicable, I'm sure, to the United States situation. It's the next decade that we're talking about. Thank you. Because the window in Skype has cut that one off. But automation impact at least 50% of Canadian jobs in the next decade. Sorry, is the entire article title. That's not in there. Sorry, I'm sorry I said that. Bad joke. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And let's see, I got to catch up with commentary that has come in over the past couple of minutes and fix a issue on the laptop here at the same time. So multitasking. Serena Blaze, Peace Arena, our tweeter friend, Peace Arena, has said, a link, please, to the, quote, most important story. Difficult to do. So figure of speech there, too. The most important story is sort of the overarching story, but you already know the story. The most important story in Jake's view that Greg passed on to us was the teachers' strikes in West Virginia and the spreading of the teachers' strikes to Oklahoma and likely elsewhere. Not one particular article or anything like that, but rather the most important story in America being this labor flashpoint and the reemergence of labor activism, but of a very specific type, and as important to recognize here, and something we really need to spend some time exploring, a very different kind of strike, this wildcat action that ordinarily would be viewed as violating existing labor law, but going ahead and doing it anyway. Like, basically, what are they going to do to us? They can't lock up all the teachers, and they may not even be interested in doing so. But really taking advantage of the right situation to show the hand and strength of collective bargaining and labor, and they have a sympathetic plaintiff, if you will, in all of this, that being the teachers. It's very difficult, despite the efforts of the Koch brothers and really hardcore right-wing and sometimes alt-right nuts, to try over the past couple of years. And remember, there was a very clear and obvious and open effort to paint teachers' unions and indeed all public employee unions as particularly evil, as particularly egregious violations of how things ought to be. And it was really amazing that they were able to get away with that for a certain amount of time. And I guess based on the fact that they did get away with it for a while, it would have been or might have been difficult to predict that a teacher's strike would possibly represent a breakout moment for us. Like, you got buried 5 years ago. How could it be teachers that are able to push back on this? But I think that was very savvy and shrewd of them. I don't think they cared to, take the lead for all of labor necessarily and do so because they were teachers. They were just plain fed up and were ready to strike on their own anyway, regardless of what else is happening elsewhere. But a convenient moment, and savvy of them to recognize that they were still sympathetic plaintiffs in all this, rather than absorbing the lesson the Kochs wished they had levied upon them and convincing them that they were worthless. This is it's also a very interesting parallel to gaslighting and the men's rights / pickup artist / alt-right melding of sicko perverts, basically under and their pursuit of negging, as they called it in their circles, a active. What is rumbling over here? Oh. I'll have to tell you what's interrupted us here in a second. But the practice among pickup artists of negging was, let's see, a brief explanation of that was basically insulting / knocking down the self-confidence of women they sought to pick up, so that, you would damage their self-esteem, so that then later on in the process, an expressed interest in that woman, even though it was a, generally speaking, prurient interest of very little or no value to the woman themselves, would be seen as an affirmation of their value after all, and that woman would then find themselves mysteriously attracted to that man who had treated them so badly. But basically a manipulation technique, and in a way, the Koch brothers funded campaign against all public employees, but particularly teachers as well, might have been a little bit like, I don't know what they hoped to coax out of teachers. So it's not a perfect parallel. They simply, look to destroy their power, period. Maybe to at least, convince them that they were so valueless that they shouldn't stand up in opposition to, say, the Betsy DeVos-led drive to privatize schools, and to maybe do it gradually by with the intermediate step of charter schools, etc., but then moving to vouchers, and then finally the elimination of public education. But who was going to be your obvious opponent in the elimination of public education? Was going to be public school teachers. It was a big job to destroy America's sympathies with school teachers, public or private, but in particular, public schools where regular people sent their kids. And so it was a long-term project for them. It was hard work to try to break down America's, respect for teachers, but they've done a pretty good job at it. All right, let's see. By the way, we were rudely interrupted by my texting system buzzing the phone here, but it slid over against a... here it goes again. Oh, my God. I can't believe I'm getting both of these. So I should just move it right to the microphone. This is on silent, but you can still hear it, of course, because it's vibrating. The first alert that came across was emergency alert. I said, oh, my God, I better look. Is there a missile coming from North Korea? It's a test of the Loudoun County wireless emergency alert system. No action is required. God damn it. Stop bothering me then. But now I'm interrupted by a test of the Montgomery County, Maryland, by the way, wireless emergency alert system. But guess what? No action required. So I guess that's good and all. And Montgomery County, Maryland, I guess technically borders, there's nothing technical about it, definitely borders Loudoun County, Virginia. It's just that the Potomac River is in the way. As the crow flies, though, we're within, I guess, the striking distance. So if Montgomery County were having a emergency and they wanted to let everybody within a, I don't know, say 5-mile radius know, well, as the crow flies, we're within 5 miles of Montgomery County. It just takes an hour to get there because you have to drive down and around in order to get to Montgomery County, Maryland. Most people would take it down to the Beltway, and everyone knows the infamous Washington, D.C. Beltway will take you an hour to get around there, and then cross the bridge and then drive back into Maryland. To get to that place that is within a mile or two as the crow flies, take you about an hour to hour and a half, just because of the way things are laid out there. So we're doing great on infrastructure here in the Washington, D.C. area. Maybe we'll have an infrastructure week. By the way, if you're scoring at home, the roster of people who have departed the White House, either under a cloud or otherwise, his infrastructure, Trump's infrastructure guy, waiting and waiting and waiting, I guess probably never left his desk for a meal because at any point, infrastructure week could finally break out, and he starved to death, I think, is what happened to him, and now he's out of the administration. That's not really what happened to him, but it's interesting anyway. Let's see, other stories that we might pick up on and commentary that's come in. I just see now Kate Sherrill was pointing out, this is another alert. What county is this now? It's the Fairfax County. Obviously, this is going to be a recurring problem. Should I name for you other counties that are contiguous with Loudoun County? The Fairfax County Wireless Emergency Alert System is happening now. I think there's going to be this represents a fair amount of people. There's going to be like several million annoyed iPhone customers who are going to say, really, every county has to test it all at once? No action is required. I mean, I guess next, Arlington County could go off, but it's not contiguous with Loudoun. Clark County, Virginia, we could have something from, is it Jefferson County, West Virginia? What else could happen here? I don't know. I think that's it for contiguous counties, but I guess we'll wait and see. Sorry. Kate Sherrill had sent me the alert that Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Salman from Saudi Arabia was in the news. Let's see. She sends me Jake Sherman's tweet here from Playbook this AM. We've been struck by how MBS has been treated in the U.S. He imprisoned a large swath of Saudi society, by which we should mean he imprisoned a large number of Sauds, actual family members. His country is constantly criticized for human rights abuses. Women are akin to second-class citizens. Why don't you say they're second-class citizens? He is an autocrat, and he gets big groups in L.A. and New York. What does that mean? He gets big groups in L.A., New York. And there's a screen grab underneath here reading, it's fascinating how the U.S. media is covering MBS's visit. There we are. He gets a big crowd when he visits. Visit to the United States. He's the autocratic head of a petrostate that has been scolded for human rights abuses, yet he's covered as if he's a harmless, visionary British royal. This is a guy who locked up much of the country's upper class in a Ritz-Carlton not too long ago, and I think we're just fascinated with royalty and wealth, and it's a quaint idea that this whole country is actually ruled by a king over there, and none of us go there, and it's a mysterious place that we don't really care too much about as long as they keep sending oil and hopefully stop funding terrorism. And even if they don't stop funding terrorism and we no longer get that much oil from them, we're conditioned to let it all go. I see also, I guess he's on the cover of Time magazine, the Time of Cover magazine as well. The Saudi crown prince thinks he can transform the Middle East. Should we believe him? That's the story on Time. Most people saying, no, we shouldn't. And should have probably set that tweet aside just so you could all see the picture of the Saudi crown prince on the cover. And we'll do that. Take care of that one. And head back to our comments here. Let's see. Other things to check up on and catch up on. Michael Musson. These partisan traits back when we were talking about first article with Greg. These partisan traits might be counterintuitive, but this helps explain why certain groups support parties that seemingly act against their interests. That's quite possible. If that isn't why they are choosing a party. Let's see. Oh, and here on teachers, Kate Sherrill chiming in even earlier. This is talking about K through 12 teachers, but when I worked full-time at a community college, what is that? Donald Trump wants to know. I also had a part-time job, and this would be a chart. Yeah, the big story out of Oklahoma in particular has been, it was the story in West Virginia, but Oklahoma teachers have really been highlighting how many teachers find themselves in need of second jobs just to keep up with expenses. This chart here from Vox, teachers are 5 times more likely to have a second job than the average full-time worker. Very interesting. So that's a common thing, and not just because they have more free time in the summers. I mean, traditionally, I know a lot of teachers have had second occupations that they pursue with some seriousness during the summer months, but not all. But yeah, it's a professional position. We should be making sure that working that one job is enough, and that would, of course, make it possible for them to dedicate more time to the education of our kids, after all, rather than keeping their eyes elsewhere, like working as Walmart greeters. Also a good point offered up by Kate Sherrill this morning. CNN tweeting a list of the companies that Trump has attacked on Twitter since his election, and it's a rather astonishing one. So far in this list, and probably we've missed a few, or CNN has missed a few. ABC News, Amazon, Boeing, CBS, CNN, Comcast/NBC/MSNBC, Delta, ESPN, Facebook, General Motors, Lockheed Martin, Merck, New York Times, the NFL, Nordstrom, oh yes, Toyota, and Washington Post. Nordstrom, what a list we made here on this one, but he wasn't there. It's true. Kate, wondering aloud, such as one might do on Twitter by typing, I wonder how many of his friends and family got advance notice and make money off of stock trades. That's a good question. I've never really thought of Donald Trump as much of a stock player. Is he a major owner of stocks? That doesn't seem to be where he puts his money. Maybe it should have been, but it hasn't been. But he loves to talk about the stock market and Wall Street, my friends, and making money, and as if he played the market, and I don't think he really does. But that's a good question, whether do we think he's conscious enough of what he's doing to give people a heads up? Is there a period during which you can get one? Or is it really, what really should be happening here? If you were smart, should I give smart people a tip? I don't know. Maybe this works and maybe it doesn't. I'm guessing. I think this would work. Let's say I guess for day traders, right? If you wanted that information, watch Fox and Friends. I hate to advertise for them. Don't watch Fox and Friends. What you should be watching for is maybe Twitter, something like that. And you could monitor what's going on there. And when you see a company being attacked on Fox and Friends, then you can be pretty sure that that's going to happen. And Trump is going to do that at some point in the near future. And you should buy or sell appropriately based on that, and then you'll beat the curve. By the time the president gets around to it, it might be a little late. And as I'm saying, what I'm saying here is that I don't know that Trump would be capable of giving friends and family a heads up in the main. There are very few things on that list that I think that he gave any prior thought to attacking. I think most of it was in response to what he saw on television. So I'm not certain that there's really any significant insider trading going on based on the president giving people tips, or even the president's staff giving people tips. Though if they could identify such an opportunity, they would absolutely take it, I'm sure. And they may be thinking about doing that in the future. The smart money for stock manipulation, therefore, would be in giving tips to friends and family that you were embarking on a PR campaign aimed at getting your grievance aired on Fox and Friends, like that guy who got the pardon. You can actively lobby Fox and Friends for attention, and if they'll give it to you, then you're off to the races. And you should probably tell your friends and family that you are about to undertake such a venture so that they could cash in on it. And I don't know if you could even get caught for insider trading there. If you said, look, I'm going to start a PR campaign about some company that I think is really rotten. Well, you know, I mean, I guess if you just told them that, then you would, if the intuition was to sell stocks, if you started dumping stocks based on the news that a bad PR campaign was coming, you could conceivably find yourself in trouble. What about if you bought those stocks, though? Thinking the campaign hasn't started yet, but maybe with a buying spree, we can stimulate others who are observing us to start buying as well, drive the stock price up, only then we know to turn around and sell in 6 days because the campaign's going to start. I think that would probably still get you in trouble, but not with this SEC, not with this administration, unless you are a Democrat, in which case it's dirty, rotten, low down, and we're going to get you and throw you out of the country for it. All right. Let's see. Catching up on a couple other comments. Let's see. Arliss Bunny, what have you got to say here? You want to join us for a couple of minutes? Why don't we, that's for talking MBS. Well, let me put it this way. If it's a couple of minutes, we got a break coming up in about, it's 10:20. So about 7 minutes, we'll be out of here again. If you want to join me immediately and squeeze it in, otherwise perhaps wait for after the break, or if not, then perhaps we schedule something for Friday when things are wide open. But if it's a breaking news story, certainly feel free to chime in and let me know what you're thinking. I have to produce this on the air. We got no other alternative. If we were a big money operation, I could be snapping my fingers at a production staff and say, get on the phone with Arliss and see what we can arrange. I don't have that. You could make a difference in our having that, of course, by participating in our fantastic Patreon account, patreon.com/KagroX. And by the way, I have noticed people have been gaming the system a bit in a very positive way, and I should be thanking more people probably by name for their generous contributions monthly. But I can see that we were getting closer and closer to breaking the mark for $1,000 a month in continuing support, which is fantastic. And I think I get email alerts when people subscribe or change their subscription. And I see, so if you were to say, change your subscription from $1 a month to $2 a month, or I don't know, $1 million a month to $2 million a month, I would get a little email that says you did that. And I could see that there were a few people that were changing their monthly contributions by, one person in particular who changed the contribution by the dollar amount that would be necessary to put us up over the top. They said, I'm going to increase my contribution. And that brought us to $990 something. And they said, all right, well, one more dollar will put us over $1,000 a month. So that's very helpful. That's great in maintaining our expenses and meeting hosting expenses and various equipment needs, and being able to give a slightly larger token amount of money to Scott Anderson, who does our summaries. But let's say with college expenses coming up in the near future, how would you all like to get us to the $70,000 a year that it will cost to send kids to a nice private liberal arts college in the future? All right, well, that might be asking too much of you, but yeah, at some point when expenses rise and the kids head off to college, we'll have to take a good hard look at whether or not this operation is bringing in enough dollars to support all the people who need to be a part of it, and whether my time is better spent greeting people at Walmart. That wouldn't be where I go, but maybe some teachers out there could clue me into some helpful second career opportunities that could help foot those bills. Anyway, let's tell you what, Arliss, whatever works for us will be fine here. Why don't we say we'll talk on Friday, and then that way we won't be under as much time pressure, and we can catch up with you then. Let's look back then at the other editions that Greg has sent our way and see if we can't work them into the conversation. How are we on the rest of these comments, by the way? Okay, Matthew Rigdon saying, shouldn't Fox and Friends be investigated for stock manipulation? Sure, absolutely. Why not? Go ahead. I mean, in another time, in another administration, another SEC, we could do that. Sure, all finance shows talk about stocks, but how many are able to manipulate the president? That is a great question and a very serious way to look at it. Who did I see the other day? One of the Baldwin brothers. I guess one of the non-crazy Baldwin brothers. There's more than one. Saying, you ought to be thinking about what Trump does in terms of stock fraud, essentially. That, he's very intentionally manipulating the market. He may not be playing it himself, and he may not even know who's doing what with it, but he's very definitely interfering in the marketplaces in a way, again, that conservatives up until like last week totally opposed, but now really love because of the first couple of articles that we read today. Let's see. By the way, some other comments from Chief Beef Loco, somewhat more difficult to distill sometimes, but let's see. Speaking directly to Greg in this one, indeed, because Trump refuses to have or offer any policy to his bluster blather, his anti-intellectual spaniel Toady and Lickspittle are all allowed to retain their static thoughts, behaviors, and feelings of their safe cognitive dissonance triangular bubble. Triangular. What makes it, let's see, thoughts, behaviors, feelings, cognitive. All right. Well, and one more comment here. Cognitive dissonance, the term, of course, meaning thoughts, behaviors, and feelings equals a triangle and I missed this part. A triangle or a delta. And sum of all angles, it's a triangle. Sum of all angles must equal 180 degrees. So if one angle becomes acute, others must become more obtuse and add collective narcissism. Interesting approach to this. MAGA, Make America Great Again, can't overcome feeling or a thought or change behavior lest their personality glitch. Woo! All right, so slice through that in your morning. It's been a really interesting day here. Let's see. The other pieces that Greg sent along before we depart for our break. There was the Axios piece. Steve Levine, I'm guessing. I'm sure if it wasn't for the capital V in this, I might otherwise say Levine, but that's what it looks like now. A long disruption, TM, is ahead with low-paying jobs. Too bad for the teachers who need to find more work. The last few months have seen a rash of studies on a coming automation apocalypse. That's true. And analysts are moving to a few targeted worries about the jobs' future. Their big picture, there may be a long, deep economic disruption lasting decades and taking millions of jobs. That sounds bad. The economy will eventually come out of it, but wages for most jobs may be too low to sustain a middle-class lifestyle. That could be a launching point back to, many people are using it in their writing as a launching point back to the discussion of universal basic income, by the way. We won't do that here yet. Important background, the Axios piece continues. In the 19th century, it took about 6 decades for U.S. wages to recover after the first industrial age automation of the 1810s and the agriculture to industrial shift of the 20th century lasted 4 decades. So it looks like we're in for the long haul again and the trouble spots. Karen Harris, managing director of Bain's Macro Trends Group. We should not be relying on Bain for anything, but I guess if it's prediction of economic doom, Bain's pretty good at that. We have reason to believe that they can spot economic doom coming, right? All they have to do is tell us what they're investing in, and that thing is economically doomed once they suck all the money out of it. So we could depend on them for that. Karen Harris forecasts that the new automation wave could displace 2.5 million workers a year. That compares with 1.2 million a year displaced in the agricultural upheaval from 1900 to 1940 after adjusting for population, and 800,000 a year in the onset of the information age from 1970 to 1990. The coming disruption may be the most disruptive to the workforce in 100 years, Harris said. She sees that potentially leading to an upheaval rivaling the current populism. We see the kindling accumulating. It's hard to know what the spark is that starts the fire, she says. So what a great analysis. Something terrible is coming. Don't know what it is. We'll be back in 2 minutes to take a guess. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. One final segment before wrapping it up for the day. What can we cram into this? Let's continue with the Axios piece here. Very interesting and intriguing possibilities coming up here. And I guess I'm trying to look ahead to at what else has been laid aside in Pocket. See what else we can fit in here today. Where we left off was Karen Harris of Bain's Macro Trends Group talking about what she thought was a trend that could see automation wave that could see 2.5 million workers displaced each year. I mean, that's relatively specific. We just don't know specifically, well, what companies will that be happening to? Who can predict that? The coming disruption may be the most disruptive to the workforce in 100 years, she said. And she sees that leading to potentially an upheaval rivaling current populism. Right, kindling is accumulating. Hard to know what the spark is that starts the fire. Where will this all begin? We expect it to build up over the next decade. Wages and not jobs themselves are the key issue, economists seem to agree. MIT's Andrew McAfee, co-author of The Second Machine Age, tells Axios that companies are not creating the middle-class jobs that were the backbone of the economy for more than half a century. I'll start to calm down when old-fashioned middle-class jobs come back. I'm just not seeing that, he said. We don't have a job quantity problem, McAfee said, but a job quality problem. Wage disparity is increasing, said Brookings' Mark Muro. Automation will affect everyone, but will create more problems for different groups. Young people, perhaps, those less educated, groups that already receive less training and less education. The bottom line, we can stipulate that given human history and adaptability, we can have a phenomenal future. Okay, Harris said, but transitions are always challenging. Given where we are starting today, given inequality, changes in geopolitics, it's hard to see a turbulent-free transition to this brighter future. Yeah, sounds pretty unlikely. And it should be turbulence-free transition to this brighter future. So you just lost points on the SAT. You should have gone to a lower-tiered college and be in a less well-compensated job right now. Please make way for me to take all your money. Why doesn't this work for me? What was it? I'm trying to think. There was a thought that occurred to me on the way into the break, just after reading the Karen Harris pieces that I didn't get a chance to make a note of, and now I'm at a loss, and I'm not certain that we're able to dig that point out. But okay, let me turn to the second piece, I guess, and take a quick look at this Canadian deal right here. What's the deal here? Cision. That's I guess it looks like the I don't know, brand name of the news service I'm reading here, but it's a Canadian newswire.ca is what the website I'm at here. Automation to impact at least 50% of Canadian jobs in the next decade, RBC Research says. Who's RBC? You tell me. I don't know. Here's a link. Let's see if we can figure this out. That's the RBC. It's a bank. Is that what it is? This is what it looks like here. Is that the logo? Royal Bank of Canada. Very simple. Okay, that makes things easy. Canadians up there saying, "What is RBC? What's the matter with you Americans? You don't pay any attention to this." I don't know. I barely know what banks are in my neighborhood. What would I be going to a bank for? I don't have anything for them, and they have nothing for me. All right, well, let's see. Human intelligence and critical for young people and jobs of the future. Is this key findings of this bank study? Well, I think it largely represents the same conclusions, and I guess this is really just best used as a reminder that this is going to happen to you in Canada, too. As a matter of fact, it does say down here, key findings. Canada's economy is on target to add 2.4 million jobs over the next 4 years. That's good. How do you get jobs? Whereas adding jobs for robots? Virtually all of which will require a different mix of skills. Thank you very much. That was really helpful, Royal Bank of Canada, folks. But what are they trying to say here? New RBC research paper, Humans Wanted, How Canadian Youth Can Thrive in the Age of Disruption, has revealed that 50% of Canadian jobs will be disrupted by automation in the next 10 years. And yet this person is saying $2.4 million jobs on target to add those 2.4. I mean, are they robot builders? That's a good question. I don't know whether we should parse through this or not. However, I am reminded that there was also this other comment here from Matthew Rigdon. This brought up an interesting point for discussion. Since Clinton established that a president, I'm going to shift gears here, established that a president could be sued in civil court and not skirt it, and of course we're talking about Bill Clinton, the Clinton that was actually got to serve as president, we'll put it that way, would shareholders be able to sue the president directly for stock losses? The hotel cases are still working their way through the court, so maybe there's not really an answer yet. And there's not in one important way. There is an answer. That is to say, there's court precedent, of course, for suing a president in civil court while in office, and a couple of moving parts to that one. You should keep in mind that you are talking about dealing with a government that is the majority of those serving in office being Trumpists and conservatives. You must approach this with caution. The fact that there is court precedent for prosecuting a Democrat doesn't really tell you a great deal about what could happen to a Republican, because they're huge hypocrites and don't care who knows it when it comes to clinging to political power. So could the fact that Bill Clinton had to face a civil case while sitting as president lead to the logical conclusion that Donald Trump could face a civil suit while president? Yes. Will a court allow it to go forward because the precedent exists? Question mark. It is not just for, we'll have to say on radio, craps and giggles that the Republicans stonewalled the nomination of Merrick Garland and stole a Supreme Court seat for Neil Gorsuch. It is an open question whether A, they choose to acknowledge the relevance of that precedent when it comes to their president, or B, whether that precedent stands. They could go one of two ways. Simply ignore it and say, to hell with what happened before. We're just going to do this thing and I'm going to rule this way. Or they could upend it. I think that would be relatively foolish and unnecessary, because a Democrat will one day be president again, and then that precedent will matter again when they want to press a civil case against the next Democrat. They weren't kidding about stealing a Supreme Court seat and what they intended to do with it once they did. And they'll steal another one if they can do it. And they'll steal circuit court seats along the way, and did so for several years so that they could get away with this sort of thing. The fact that we all saw it happen to Bill Clinton doesn't mean that they'll allow it to happen to Donald Trump or any other sitting Republican president. And it won't make logical sense, but you will be able to do very little about it if 5 people on the Supreme Court say it's dumb, it's counterintuitive, it doesn't match previous precedent or the logic for it, but there it is. Kiss my ass. There's nothing you can do about it. That's now the law of the land, and that's the system we've got. And I'm sorry that it upsets you in the same way, coincidentally, that the system we've got made Donald Trump president, though he lost the popular vote by 3 to 5 million votes. What are you going to do? Bad break. Oopsie in the Constitution, and you're going to have to live with it. Somebody has to draw the line here. The 5 of us get to tell you not only what the line is, but who gets to draw it, and you're out of luck. So a little bit of judicial branch realism for you there, even if I've over-dramatized it. Okay, let's see. What other topics might we cover? That's a pretty depressing one right there. Kate Sherrill, another comment here. Hey, they had to fund government offices like the Department of Fatwa and Research somehow. That's a real thing, no joke. What is this comment about, you might wonder? Michael Gold's tweet. Michael Gold is, well, let's identify the man while we're at it here. Let's see. Social media and sundry at the New York Times, last at Washington Post. So moving around among the roster of papers of record there. Michael Gold tweeting, it turns out the Islamic State made 6 times as much money from tax revenue than it did from oil money. We know this, that is very interesting, because, who am I looking at here? Well, another tweeter is that, okay, Kalamachi. I was first like, Call Imachi. Someone who works for Roll Call? No. Someone who works for the New York Times. It's Rukmini Kalimachi is my best attempt at pronunciation, who I guess has done some of the report. We're going through like 3 tweets here. Kate tweeted Michael Gold. Michael Gold tweeted Rukmini Kalamachi saying, let's see. So the Islamic State made 6 times as much money from tax revenue as it did from oil money, which is all fascinating that they made any revenue at all, which tells us a little bit about how we've probably misconstrued what ISIS is here in the United States. We were always going to do that so long as they had any interest in using terrorism as their favorite political weapon. We're going to be blinded by the terrorism and not see the rest of the picture. And, it might not even be a particularly valuable or relevant picture that we're having obscured by terrorism. Terrorism tends to blot everything out, though. Let's see. We know this because, of course, of the reporting that uncovered more than 15,000 documents that show how ISIS's bureaucracy worked. And that is probably a fascinating inquiry right there all by itself and would probably fill an entire show. But, well, Kate, I think you've got a finger on the pulse of the way we work here. This sort of stuff is really fascinating to us, and think about how we've rethought what Saudi Arabia really is, how we occasionally try to unpack, well, what is capitalism, and beyond the sloganeering about it. And now ISIS, which was always a fascinating idea in that they attached so much importance internally to, what would you call it, nation building, I guess. They really thought that they were going to establish a caliphate and I guess govern it as what? As a nation state, as a country, something different, a pan-Arabic, pan-Muslim. I guess it's pan-Islamic rather than pan-Arabic. But, who knows? It never got off the ground. How much of it was serious? How much of it was merely corrupt local warlords looking to cash in? I don't know. And I guess now we have some sense of it, because the New York Times has a piece called The ISIS Files. We unearthed thousands of internal documents that help explain how the Islamic State stayed in power so long. It doesn't feel like it was all that long, but I guess the fact that they were in power, whatever even that might mean, at all is interesting, I guess, to those of us who fell prey to the blindness that our media's approach to terrorism is likely to foster. But not all of our media, because somebody got the assignment to look at this and examine ISIS as a political force rather than just a nasty bunch of terrorists who are supposedly going to show up at any moment and maybe participate in shooting up a school, and so therefore we had to have guns in those schools. But in fact, remember the stories that we read along the way. ISIS, one, the fact that they were able to sell oil. Like, what do you mean sell oil? The fact that they were able to impose taxation. The fact that they sort of kind of ran a hotel at some point. The fact that they were trying to amass land holdings as opposed to simply being stateless terrorism actors was very different. But we didn't care, because we only know one way to think of terrorism here in the United States, which is basically that every brown person wants to kill you, and you're going to have to try to kill them first, even if it's just walking along suburban streets here in the United States. That's the long and short of it, right? Well, I don't know. This is very interesting. I'm sure we'd never get through this very long-looking piece, but let's give you a taste of it. It's illustrated with a photo taken in Mosul in 2017. Paperwork littered the remains of ISIS's bombed-out Ministry of Agriculture. Largest point here, ISIS had a Ministry of Agriculture, and they had documents. They were trying to run a thing, a going concern, a government here. And why this surprises us, I don't know. I mean, it really just fascinates me. It doesn't surprise us because we were vaguely, at least, aware of the fact that they were trying to run a government. And that even didn't surprise us because we know that Hamas and Hezbollah both have, fairly significant political operations, as much as we like to try to ignore them here in the United States. All right, let's get a taste of this article here. I'm intrigued. On 5 trips to battle-scarred Iraq, journalists for the New York Times scoured old Islamic State offices, gathering thousands of files abandoned by the militants as their, quote, caliphate crumbled. As we know, Donald Trump thinks caliphate means land, real estate. And this is the reporting work of, once again, Rukmini Callimachi. Hopefully pronouncing that close to correctly. Datelined in Mosul, Iraq. Weeks after the militants seized the city, as fighters roamed the streets and religious extremists rewrote the laws, an order rang out from the loudspeakers of local mosques. Public servants, the speakers blared, were to report to their former offices. To make sure every government worker got the message, the militants followed up with phone calls to supervisors. When one tried to beg off, citing a back injury, he was told, "If you don't show up, we'll come and break your back ourselves." Well, okay, that's what sets it apart from what we traditionally think of as genuine government. But it's not out of keeping with practices of things that, for whatever other reason, the United States has been willing enough to recognize as a genuine government in other parts of the world. We don't have a great track record. No one has a spotless track record when it comes to this stuff. But, this is an overarching theme in the show after all. One that, has woven its way in and out from the very beginning. One of the first long read articles that we started on and probably never finished. Very first, way back in the beginning of our daily broadcasts, was the New York Times Magazine article, now coming to mind, Cocaine Incorporated. Do you remember when we were reading about this and thinking about how interesting it was that some significant portion of the gang-driven like international drug cartel, I guess we should say, driven cocaine trade was very much, an economic operation that they were really trying to, moneyball and squeeze the most possible money out of. And it reminded us a lot of, for instance, that storyline in the HBO show The Wire, when Stringer Bell really was studying economics to try and make his street-level drug-funded operation more economical and more efficient. But we forget how much of gang activity masquerades as sometimes as world stage governance, sometimes as street level governance that, if looked at just right and you squint hard enough, doesn't look that much different from local authority. And we've talked also about, for instance, the libertarianism of Vito Corleone, the fictional character, of course, but who very much set himself up as a localized state. That you were supposed that you would get protection from him in exchange for, what the quote unquote legitimate government calls a system of bribery and extortion, but he might call taxation, and they very often did call it taxation. But you'd get protection in exchange for it, and you were expected also to bring your problems both within the system and without the system, and those that arose from tensions between Vito Corleone's authority and the authority of the quote-unquote actual state. You were supposed to prefer bringing your problems to Vito Corleone for resolution than to the hated police of the rival gang of police. That rival operation, either the federal government or the state of New York. It's an interesting parallel, all of these things. Well, let's take a look here. So all you guys have to come back to work and run a government. We've conquered Mosul. We want to be the new government of Mosul. We can't do that without government workers. Government workers, understandably reluctant perhaps to work for ISIS, or perhaps genuinely injured and can't come to work. So, what do we do best? We are terrorists, first and foremost. Well, or they might say not first and foremost, but we do have an acquired expertise in terrorism, and we can use it on a hyper-localized level. We'll kill you if you don't come back to work and run the government for us. Okay, that phone call reached Mohammed Nasser Hamoud, a 19-year veteran of the Iraqi Directorate of Agriculture, behind the locked gate of his home where he was hiding with his family. Terrified but unsure what else to do, he and his colleague trudged back to their 6-story office complex decorated with posters of seed hybrids. Seems so innocuous, right? They arrived to find chairs lined up in neat rows as if for a lecture or an all-hands company meeting, right? Department meeting. The commander who strode in sat facing the room, his leg splayed out so that everyone could see the pistol holstered to his thigh. For a moment, the only sounds were the hurried prayers of the civil servants mumbling under their breath. Their fears proved unfounded. Though he spoke in a menacing tone, the commander had a surprisingly tame request. "Resume your jobs immediately," he told them. Hey, not so bad, right? A sign-in sheet would be placed at the entrance to each department. Those who failed to show up would be punished, and that would probably worry you given the nature of the people issuing the order. But generally speaking, if you complied, it seemed like, this might even be considered in some ways a return to normalcy. Meetings like this one occurred throughout the territory controlled by the Islamic State in 2014. Soon, municipal employees were back fixing potholes, painting crosswalks, repairing power lines, and overseeing payroll. Weird, right? And you might say, why would people agree to go along with such an agenda? Because you'll be killed if you don't. And besides which, what were they really asking for? A return to normalcy. In the name of ISIS, though. Yes. I mean, I'm sorry that that's the case, but they did have almost literally a gun to our heads. We had no choice but to go back to work, said Mr. Hamoud. We did the same job as before, except now we were serving a terrorist group, and that is scary. And what makes them a terrorist group? Well, of course, their external actions. But and some of you might be pointing, or I bet it would be really interesting to have this discussion in a way, frustrating as hell, but interesting in a way, in a controlled environment, to have this discussion or read this article with conservatives who would immediately say, well, you see the difference. This isn't a legitimate government. It's not a legitimate government office. You see that the commander, as they say, sat with his legs splayed out so that everyone could see the pistol holstered to his thigh. Obviously, and a quite explicit threat against them, and this is not consent of the governed, and you have me there. But on the other hand, I was just out of curiosity. Let's go back in time to, let's say, 5 minutes before we began reading this article and survey the internet. Let's say, stick to Twitter, look at what conservatives are saying, talking about something they think means something entirely different, and ask them how abnormal they would have considered it for Americans in the wake of the school shootings, the YouTube shooting, the everything else shooting, the gun controversy ongoing in this country. If your local supervisor said, I'm coming to work with a gun strapped on, and I don't care who sees it, I'm going to open carry, but I'm here to defend against ISIS, you see, which is a terrorist organization, first and foremost, because your newspapers report it that way, and television news, which doesn't have the time or interest in getting into nuance like the New York Times is able to do in these long-form pieces for more intelligent readers and more intelligent consumers. Your real problem, the difference between this local gun hero and the evil ISIS bastards, is he is trying to protect us from ISIS, whereas over in ISIS, they're trying to get local workers at the Ministry of Agriculture to blow themselves up inside American preschools. No, they have a different division for that. Of course, don't we have a division that sometimes, tends not to set out with the goal of blowing up foreign preschools, but sometimes does do that? It makes for an interesting parallel. This could be a fascinating read. There's no way we're going to get anywhere near through all of it or even the introduction of it, but this does sound intriguing. We can at least conclude this section here. Mr. Hamoud saying, we did the same jobs as before, except we are now serving a terrorist group. Sort of. The disheveled fighters who burst out of the desert more than 3 years ago founded a state that was acknowledged by no one except themselves. And yet for nearly 3 years, how can you ignore that if you're living there, right? The Islamic State controlled a stretch of land that at one point was the size of Britain, with a population estimated at 12 million people. At its peak, it included a 100-mile coastline in Libya, a section of Nigeria's lawless forests, and a city in the Philippines, as well as colonies in at least 13 other countries. By far, the largest city under their rule was Mosul. And, put that way, what a fascinating case study. I mean, putting aside the murderous terrorism, which is awfully hard to put aside in any context. But wow, what a story! And yeah, I mean, I guess there's no way to describe it, but other than as pan-Islamic, because not contiguous territory, or at least not much in the way of contiguous territory. Colonies all over the place, but how is that any different from anything else? It's the size of Britain, you say. What a coincidence that something the size of Britain should have colonies all over the place. Because that would be ridiculous. What an untenable situation that would be. A country the size of Britain holding territory around the world, such, let's say, that the sun might never set on that empire. Wouldn't that be absurd? Who could ever imagine such a thing? There are some interesting lessons to be drawn from this. Not that we have the time to do it because we're a broadcast medium, and you know what they say about broadcast media. There's no opportunity to get into nuance and deeper meaning and long pieces here in the broadcast media. So I guess we're going to have to leave it there. How do you like that? Well, we got Friday coming up, and all day Friday to get distracted about other things, including probably, Stormy Daniels and weirdo tweets about Donald Trump eating too many official meals out there. There's no way to fit it all in. But I'll tell you what, a good remedy for that is staying tuned here to Netroots Radio, really honestly, all day long, but with some specificity for the next upcoming program, Justice Putnam's West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Let's see what we can tell you about what you'll hear if you just stay tuned. Coming up, Trump's trade war with China is just a nice way of telling his base, you only hurt the one you love. Lots of psychological weirdness today. Then, on the rest of the menu of the day, Betsy DeVos wanted to prosecute the leakers at the Department of Education, but was shot down by her own agency's internal watchdog. Trump's mobster business associate Felix Sater was on Capitol Hill the other day,
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
It's true. Thank you for listening. Yes, Felix Sater, the infamous mobster / informant, good guy / bad guy, we don't know what, grilled by the Senate Intelligence Committee for 7 hours. And Trump's shady data firm, Cambridge Analytica, already trying to hijack the next election. And that's just the one here. You know, they're active around the world, too.